In the early 1930s, the Soviets planned and executed a famine in Ukraine that killed nearly 4 million Ukrainians by starvation. This is referred to as the Holodomor. Officially managed famines are no joke, and it looks like we have one coming on a much wider scale right now. Many regions have already seen food shortages in stores and restaurants. Starting in 2020, under the ill-conceived lockdowns, completely illegal and unauthorized closures of businesses of all kinds happened. Food supply chains were destroyed wholesale. Thousands of farms were destroyed financially and driven out of business. Arson and sabotage destroyed hundreds of major national food processing and distribution plants. Food cannot be produced without energy, and President Joe Biden has taken major oil pipelines offline and designated major oil production areas to be protected wilderness. Critical infrastructure that takes many decades to build has been wiped out in the past few years. Some railroad companies refuse to transport essential fertilizers for no logical reason of any kind. Trucking companies are going bankrupt and being disrupted by cyber attacks. Something very strange is going on. By simply scanning the headlines, we can arrive at no other conclusion that there is a coordinated program to destroy food supply globally in every way possible as fast as possible. Why would anyone want to destroy our food supply? It is politics. Just like Russia's Joseph Stalin had political reasons for wiping out millions of Russians and Ukrainians, very powerful globalist oligarchs have now apparently decided it is time to rid the earth of a large portion of the human population. This bizarre program of destruction of food production, supply, and distribution has continued as farmlands in many countries are being bought out, nationalized, or closed down under the dubious excuse of environmental protection and regulatory zeal. But why would anyone want to starve billions of people? Environmental radicalism, elite arrogance and stupidity. The billionaire class seems to have an obsessive contempt for average common people. And now that technology, AI, automation, are about to take over nearly every human job, they seem to have decided it is time to clear out the useless eaters, which now means pretty much all of us. The reasons for a coming food scarcity apocalypse may be far beyond our comprehension. Scientists like Graham Hancock have found evidence that every 12 to 15,000 years on our planet, just as mankind reaches a certain state of technological advancement, an apocalypse takes the human race back down to rudimentary subsistence. And that seems to be what is happening right now. On a daily basis, those rare oligarchs, those who hold real power, easily control governments, laws, and public policy, and control the messages in our media. They seem to be telling us that by simply being alive, we are destroying their precious planet. And school children are brainwashed to think that each one of them is individually responsible for saving the planet all by themselves. Concentration of wealth and power globally has gone far beyond anything seen on Earth for the last 13,000 years. We can no longer trust anything we hear from our government or media. Money is power, and there are people and organizations which have far more discretionary money than government. Financial collectives like BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street. They own nearly every corporation you can name, especially the big ones. They own and control most property and natural resources. They control and dictate public policy. They can easily shut down food and energy production if they want to. And now they seem to want to in a big way. Whatever the reason for this coming global famine, it has already started, and it is going to happen whether we want it or not, whether we are ready for it or not, whether we even believe it or not. You will be hearing more and more about farms being shut down, or major businesses laying off thousands of employees, entire oceanic fishing industries being closed with very little rational explanation, trucking and shipping companies downsizing or going bankrupt or closing. Tyson Meat Company, one of our nation's largest meat packers, has recently announced it is closing some of their meat production and investing in new facilities to raise insects for human food supply. A few years ago, such ideas would have been laughed off as imaginary nonsense. You're about to see insect powder included as a staple ingredient in many of your processed and packaged foods. You may have noticed from your media and schools that you are supposed to feel good about the destruction of food supply as environmental protection. We are being trained to see the human race as expendable, as a detriment to planetary health, as inferior to nature, even though we're part of nature. You're being trained to see your own race as less entitled to security and well-being than other animals, even plants. We no longer use human labor to produce most of our food. We use machinery and technology to produce food, so that most of us can fritter around in cities and work in offices. That machinery requires fuel. Human labor is not what feeds you. Energy feeds you. Fuel and energy. Without that fuel, that fossil fuel, you have basically two choices: grow your own food with your own labor or starve to death. While we watch our public officials dismantle our fossil fuel energy infrastructure, the renewable energy systems are nowhere near adequate to meet our needs. Less than 30% of the world's energy comes from renewable systems. Most of it is hydropower, which cannot easily be expanded. It might take 100 years to bring renewable energy to 100% of today's demand, and yet fossil fuel infrastructure is already being shut down as if it were simply not needed. A major human catastrophe is already getting underway, as our public officials are shutting down major fuel production infrastructure. We may soon see 50% less energy available for human consumption, which means 50% less food, goods, services globally. Think about it. 8 billion people, half as much food. 10% of the human population is already starving and malnourished. That means we could see half of the world's population, each person willing to kill someone or start a war to get food. This is not going to be pretty. It is not just energy and food production. We have seen major national water resources and dams mysteriously removed, destroyed, taken offline under nonsensical environmental rationale. Water resources closed, choked off, dismantled, farmland left dry and barren as water is redirected to environmental restoration without the slightest concern about what that will mean for human survival. Today's environmental activist politicians will be seen tomorrow as ignorant, murdering ideologues who promoted an insane doctrine of human self-hatred. This will not be the kind of famine that you can get through by having a closet full of canned food and bottled water. By all indications, this is going to last for decades, even if the self-destructive policies were discontinued immediately. During times of famine, lawlessness and chaos explode. If you have food, you become a target for those who have no food, but who have, for instance, weapons and gangs. So much of our global food production infrastructure is now being destroyed that it may no longer be possible to rebuild our global food supply infrastructure before billions of people starve. It takes many years to establish a farm, especially one that produces large volumes of food. It takes experience, expertise, large-scale equipment, fuel, and all kinds of supply chain support to operate a successful farm. It takes just as long to create food processing and distribution infrastructure. Once farms and food supply infrastructure are dismantled, it can be many years or decades before they are ever rebuilt. And that can only happen when public policies change and they are allowed to be rebuilt. Farmers are being treated like criminals by your government. Farmers are the people who feed you. Our global food supply was created very slowly, century by century, as the human population grew very gradually. We had the luxury of time to build the food supply in balance with the growing population. But when the food supply crashes suddenly by insane public policy while populations remain high, there is no possible outcome but a major human catastrophe of starvation, famine, breakdown of civil order. Every one of us, every family will have to have some plan to feed ourselves. If we wish to avoid calamity, it is on you and me now to create some kind of food production to replace what we are losing. While it may buy you some time to have some stored food and supplies, all of us will need to grow food. produce food. If people are not producing food for us, we have no choice but to produce it ourselves. There's nothing else that will assure your security in the long run, and you cannot do it alone. You will need to be part of a community that is producing food. This is not like happy weekend gardening where you can run to the nursery for seeds, tools, and potting soil anytime you want. We need to plan ahead, think about food production for survival, and learn everything we can about how to cultivate and protect the best survival crops. This is a very different kind of gardening than we're used to. You need some land, you need water, you need seeds. During the 2020 pandemic, your government decided that seeds were a non-essential commodity and closed businesses that sold seeds. This is what I mean by insane public policy. So you will need to know how to germinate your own plants and harvest seeds. You will need a source of fertilizer. That can be animal waste or natural mulch from previously established green areas. You need tools, and you need access to information about how to plant, tend, and harvest very different kinds of plants you're going to grow. You need to have friends growing things so that you can trade produce when you need it. You need to know how to preserve food to survive the winter. If you don't have a tractor, you will not be making endless perfect rows of produce on broad, flat land. That may be a good thing because those open, unprotected farms are sitting ducks for poachers and gangs and starving, roaming zombies. Survival gardening will be guerrilla gardening, sloppy gardening among the weeds, hills, and rocks, behind large fences and walls. Concealment and protection will be as important as yield. Public policy in the USA is now aggressively taking farming families off their farms, out of the country, and relocating them to urban areas where subsistence gardening is next to impossible. They're now installing high-level surveillance and behavioral controls in the new smart cities where privacy and freedom are non-existent. 15-minute cities where you are literally prevented from traveling outside designated areas and penalized for whatever they call your carbon footprint. So why all the surveillance and behavioral control? They know what is coming. Depopulation is the plan. They feel you do not need a garden because they do not expect you to survive. Their plan is to have you in a place where you can't even try to survive, and the desired population reduction will be quick, unavoidable, and conclusive. In an urban environment, you have no autonomy or self-reliance. Cities only work when trucks are constantly bringing in supplies, and the economy is functioning at optimum level. When the economy is in chaos and transportation breaks down, along with the supply chains, cities will be death camps and war zones. The 5G system is how they will know where you are and what you are doing at all times. Your cell phone is the leash and collar you are wearing. You will be using trackable digital payment methods, devices, and vehicles. So if you are prepping, you will be easily identified and persecuted for hoarding. People will know where you are and what you have. Someone will come and take it. Mass surveillance means mass control. Mass control means that someone else, not you, will be controlling your life. With the scale of food shortages that are now unavoidable, there is no possible way that many of our urban populations can be fed. I lived in greater Los Angeles most of my life. On the outlying freeways, every third vehicle is a truck bringing things to people that they need in urban centers. What happens when those trucks stop coming? Urban centers will become traps of starvation, desperation, social chaos, and destruction. This is clearly part of the plan. We've already seen multi-region riots, gang shoplifting, mass shootings, road rage, you name it. Our local officials have reduced bail and enforcement as if to intentionally make all this happen. Reduced bail is not for social justice. It is because crime is already overwhelming the system. They have no more places to put criminals because so many people now see crime as their only option. Having us killing each other seems to be part of some plan. Hunger games, social conflict games, squabbling over gender identity, wokeism, racial privilege, political ideology, hate, hate, hate. Right now, if you are distracted by social identity gamesmanship, you are missing the big picture. Imagine how helpless you will be if you and your family are trapped in a densely populated city as food supplies dwindle. We must not allow our open land to be closed and unavailable for producing food. We must be able to find and use open land and water, and we must have the goal of self-reliance and community activism, not government dictate or monitored central control, but each of us doing what must be done to protect ourselves and our loved ones while respecting the rights and safety of others. As Ronald Reagan said, government is the problem. Government is what imposed the lockdowns. Government is shutting down food supply and energy supply under the name of environmental protection. Government is pushing experimental injections and exercising emergency powers in violation of our basic rights. Government no longer supports the idea of individual self-determination. Government is force and violence. Today they force you to wear a mask. Tomorrow they clean out your bank account for having the wrong carbon footprint. So private, independent community activism is now the only answer to the bizarre and destructive central policies and mandates. We must be prepared to resist and oppose the policies that take our land and leave us nowhere to go to provide for ourselves and our families. The word Holodomor refers to a special kind of famine, one that is deliberately planned and executed by some central power for the specific purpose of wiping out a targeted population by starvation. In other words, genocide by decree. The word Holodomor exists because it has happened many times. It seems to be happening again right now, but on a much larger scale. They call it a reset, but it's a Holodomor. It is a politically expedient culling of human population. Starvation causes wars, and wars cause starvation. It's very difficult to produce food during wartime. Most people who die in wars die of starvation. If a famine is being intentionally created, if population reduction is the actual underlying policy, then we can no longer trust our institutionally controlled food, water, or medicines. If someone wants to starve us, why would they not want to poison us? Poison our food and medicine, or go spread some contagious disease. This is a very different world, where your greatest threat may be government and central authorities. So the looming question is, how will you ensure your food supply? If you are new to gardening, or would like to have help from an expert, Marjorie Wildcraft has created what she calls a Grow Network, a series of webinars where she shares gardening information for people who may know little about growing food, or may be old or out of shape, or want to try to become more food independent in spite of all the odds. Marjorie Wildcraft's Grow Network webinars can be found at freedomtaker.com/food.html. I'll give you that once more in case you're writing that down. Go to freedomtaker.com/food.html.